Why it is time to dump your big tech company. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, that's Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, and of course, Amazon. All of these different big companies, they want your data. That is why they are free. These platforms and these services they provide are not necessarily something we can live without nowadays. I can argue that too. But I think you need to start thinking about minimizing how many of these tools you are using, these platforms you are using, and trying to mitigate how much data they are getting from you. Big data in general is technically good. More data means more stuff we can do with it as a species. However, conversely, data privacy is also good and important. And so you want to try to make sure that if you have the option, like you don't use Google products at all, if you're not even using Google search nowadays because you're ChatGPT and everything, maybe you don't even need to have a Google account anymore. These are the kind of ideas that I wanted to instill in you from this video. I don't know if you're going to take any action from this, and I'm going to encourage you to do so, but I'm going to give you some examples of why I use various different big companies, and then I'm going to try to say, like, if you don't have those same situations and circumstances, then maybe don't use that platform. So for example, if you have to use Microsoft for work, for Teams and Office 365, then you kind of have to have a Microsoft account, but generally those are built through the company anyways, so you might not even have to worry about it in the long run. It still technically will have your data and telemetry and tracking, so we can also talk about how to turn a lot of that stuff off, but once you leave that company, then they're no longer going to be tracking you, at least, and you don't ever have to touch that Microsoft account again. Google is a little bit harder because a lot of people use Gmail. It's been around for a long time. If you like YouTube, you have to have a Google account, technically. I think you can technically make a YouTube account without it, but it's so ingrained that you basically make one automatically. Same thing goes with like Facebook. If you want to make an Instagram account, you have to make a Facebook account. And it's weird because even to make a professional page on Instagram, you have to make a professional page on Facebook. They're linked that deeply. And so Facebook is one of those platforms where they're essentially the universal encyclopedia of people at this point. And I hate giving them that kind of moniker. It's kind of like putting them at the Wikipedia level of just like knowledge. Everyone, looks for Wikipedia when it comes to different articles about somebody. And maybe in the future, those two platforms will combine in some way. That'd be kind of scary, but it also might be super helpful too, because you have people who are deceased and in the future. So my point is though, people use Facebook as like the modern day address book. If you're friends on Facebook, then you probably are friends in real life, or you were on Facebook long enough ago that making a whole bunch of friends on your friends list was a fun thing to do. And that those are the days of poking somebody. Now, when it comes to Facebook though, unless you are making content like myself, you more than likely don't need to be on those platforms. Instagram is one of those things where yes, it's fun, and if you're not making content, you might be able to get away with not having a Facebook account. I think that is still the case. But if you don't need to make content, you don't need to be on those platforms, that might be healthier for you not to be, especially if you're a teenager or teenage girl in particular. There's a lot of negativity on, body dysmorphia and body image when it comes to women in particular, but even men too, on these platforms. And then TikTok's going away too, so it's one of those things where you can decrease your amount of social media usage and actually be more productive. Microsoft is also one of those things where if you're an Xbox player, you have a Microsoft account. And that's where my Microsoft really experience kind of kicked in, although I have been using Windows all my life. I could get away with this using Zorin or Linux and not use Windows. And I might have to at some point the way that Windows 11 is going. But for example, Windows 10 did this pretty badly, and now Windows 11 is doing it pretty egregiously. They are tracking your telemetry, your data, even typing in, like your typing habits. And these are things that are trying to gather data about your usage of the app, but you don't know if they're just using it for positive purposes or for more nefarious purposes. Presumably, it's literally just to make the operating system more efficient. But even with some of the new recall things, both Mac and Windows are doing something similar, where they're instituting like an AI that you can technically opt out of, but then you couldn't, which has been some weird back and forth in the news. But essentially, it just takes a screenshot of everything you're doing. And that way you could go back to it and review or tell the AI to say like, hey, what did I do an hour ago? Help me get back there. Brilliant idea and concept. In use case, it's very Big Brother, especially in the sense that like you can't really turn it off. And even if you wanted to, sometimes they say you can, but then they could just flip a switch and it's still on anyways. And that's something that I really found an issue with, because I would go in and turn off all these tracking features and data diagnostic tracking And yet some of those features will get turned back on when you Windows update. In fact, something recently where they can just choose to force updates on you. On my Windows PC, it forced an update on me. Guess what happened? I saved all my work. I let it run overnight because I knew it was going to take a minute to fully update. When I woke up the next day, my computer was broken, almost bricked because of the update. That's how bad that update messed up my computer, and I had to spend the entire day trying to recover my data and fix it. Luckily, I was able to, but that was purely because Windows forced me to do an update. I always pause it. You can even turn off Windows updates. You have to just pause every week or few weeks. And Apple's definitely no better. And a lot of their ecosystem is actually locked down so badly that you can't even have alternatives. And that's one reason why they were getting sued when it comes to the Apple Store on iOS. And Google definitely is very similar in that regard too, but not nearly as bad, because at least you can still sideload apps on Android. And it's been that way for a long time. But both cases, they have dramatic control over what you can do with your own devices. Hence the freedom that like Linux would give you, or even the original vision of Android. And I just think that we have to start making actions through our own usage of data, turning off features that we don't want, and fighting against them when they're forced upon us. Because Windows 11 forces you all the time to do different things. And even Windows 10 now, people are getting full screen ads, completely obscuring the Windows experience from you. Can't do anything until you close out of it, telling you to update to Windows 11. And the effed up part is, it could be on computers that can't even run Windows 11. Theoretically, it could, but due to security requirements and various just abstract requirements that Windows wants to provide, cause you to have, you can't update your computer to Windows 11, TPM, or even just certain features, right? And so you have to actually buy a new computer in order to qualify to have Windows 11. So they're literally forcing you to buy new hardware. And this nefariousness, I'm saying, is maybe not even intentional. Presumably it is. And especially with like Amazon, it presumably is. But I just think that we need to be more mindful about which companies we're using. I avoided Apple like the plague because I don't like Apple, but I know a lot of people don't like Android. That's fine. But I had my own issues with Apple and its ecosystem and its overall business practices. And so I avoided it like the plague. Never bought an iOS device, never bought any Apple device. And I don't even like AirPods. They're pretty crappy compared to other headphones. But the idea was I did not want to ever touch it, never wanted to use it. And in the course of, I wanted to make my podcast, and I wanted to have a bit more control over my podcast on the iTunes podcast store or, feed. Ironically, I didn't even need to do it in the retrospect because essentially my podcast moved over on its own because the RSS feed changed. But I didn't know it was going to do that. And I thought in order to have my podcast on Apple for people who are listening to me on Apple, I want to cater to them. I made an Apple account painstakingly. I had to go through hell and back to make a dang Apple account. You can't just go to the website and do it. They force you to go through an actual device to make an account and activate the account. You cannot actually do it by downloading iTunes or downloading Apple Music onto your computer. You have to have an actual device to authenticate it. That is an egregious level of control that was not necessary at all. And if anything, it's actually kind of counterintuitive because you're going to push more people out. And more people use Android around the world and Windows around the world than Apple products. I'm sad to see that like the majority now, slight majority, is more Apple favor in the US, but that's neither here nor there. And so this idea that each of these different companies, they're all used in different ways. I haven't even touched on Amazon. And honestly, what am I going to say about Amazon? Stop using it. Stop buying stuff on there. I bought some supplements just the other day from Amazon. I can't say don't use it because it is convenient. And so you give up those conveniences. And with commerce stores closing down now at a kind of an alarming rate, e-commerce is the future. And there's no changing that. So you have to just basically pick your devil and stick with those. There's 6 of them. Try to narrow it down to at least 4 if you can. I managed to keep it at 5, and that's mainly because I'm a gamer and a content creator, so I have to use some of these tools. But honestly, I'm kind of done with Google. Gmail has started inserting more ads, and all these different services do that more and more. And they often just try to squeeze every little penny out of you. So my point is, these are the reasons why you should dump these big tech companies. There are alternatives out there if you're techie enough or willing enough to learn. It's not that hard to learn. It's just a matter of doing it. And if you're not willing to do like Linux or Android or something like that, or some kind of alternative, then at least think about it in different ways. Maybe limit how much you're actually giving. Like go into your settings. Like today, go in your settings on your iOS, your iPhone, or your Android phone, or your MacBook, or your Windows PC. Go into the settings and turn off telemetry, turn off data tracking, turn off location. Really, you don't need that unless you're dramatically connected with somebody and they have to know your location for safety. Besides those unique circumstances, you can turn it on and then turn it back off. But besides those strenuous circumstances, turn all that stuff off and then let yourself kind of have a little bit more freedom from these companies.